first account of a Yorkshire pudding was in a recipe book called The Whole Duty of a Woman, written in 1737. Originally known by the name of a dripping pudding, Yorkshire puddings were served before or with the main meal of working class families. Traditionally, a Yorkshire pudding was served as a starter with gravy as a way to fill up the consumer before moving on to the main course, because then more meat could be spread out if people ate less. A Yorkshire pudding is made out of very simple ingredients that were cheaply and readily available to the working class people at the time. The ingredients are milk, eggs, water, flour, and meat drippings. Yorkshire puddings used to be cooked in a big, shallow tin, which was placed under the roasting meat as a way to use everything, but to also give the pudding flavour and colour. It was first named a Yorkshire pudding in Hannah Glass's The Art of Cookery, written in 1747. The recipe encouraged using white sauce for the main meal to save more gravy for the pudding, making it more of a standalone meal. After this book was published, its popularity rose through the roof, and northern cooks started to experiment with recipes, using wheat flour in a savoury dish instead of cakes, which was its usual adoption. Yorkshire's culture and attitude are very much reflected in its cooking, especially in its notorious Yorkshire pudding. You can see this by the fact that the Yorkshire pudding was made to make the most of everything, which is a very northern attitude. This is because the area was notorious for its poverty and still holds much of that stigma today. The Yorkshire pudding was created to fill people up without having to eat so much expensive meat, and to catch everything that the meat produced, even the fat. Sources of these essential fats, particularly in the north of England, were more difficult to obtain at that time, especially with the high cost of meat, so every single drop was used. A common stereotype of a Yorkshireman is being tight with money. There is a saying that goes,
"So hear all, see all, say no. Eat all, drink all, pay no. And if ever that is out for no, always do it for thyself."
This translates to hear all, see all, say nothing, eat all, drink all, pay nothing. And if you ever do anything for nothing, always do it for yourself. This shows the Yorkshire attitude of being self-sufficient and minding your business. Yorkshire natives are also often seen as friendly but also stubborn. Oftentimes, Yorkshire natives have a stronger sense of patriotism toward their county than country, and Yorkshire is often nicknamed as God's own county because of its beauty. There are several ways that the famous Yorkshire pudding can be adapted. For example, a very common adaptation is Toad in the Hole. This is where the large, shallow tray with the Yorkshire pudding batter and pre-cooked sausages are placed in the batter and are cooked with the pudding in the oven. This is then cut into squares and served with an onion gravy. This is a simple adaptation and is the traditional method, but just adding sausages. Since the Yorkshire pudding is quite a simple recipe, it can also become vegan or vegetarian. To make it vegetarian, all you need to do is substitute the lard with an oil, and to make it vegan, you can replace the eggs and milk with either soya or oat milk. The Yorkshire pudding can also be served sweet, as my great-grandmother remembers she would have them before a big meal with clotted cream and strawberry jam. The ingredients you will need are sunflower oil, 100 ml milk, 70 grams plain flour, and 2 eggs. First, add a small amount of oil into the tins, then heat up in the oven. For the batter, add the flour and eggs together in a bowl and mix with a whisk. Then slowly add the milk in small goes until thin. Then take the tray out the oven and pour batter into the tins until about 2/3 of the way full. Put back in the oven at 210 degrees for around 23 minutes. Once they have puffed up, take them out of the oven and remove from their tins. Serve either plain, with gravy or jam, and enjoy. The two key components of fish and chips is fish and chips. The potato was brought over to the Western world, and more specifically Britain, in the 17th century by explorer Walter Raleigh. Chips or fries come from Belgium, when housewives would cut up potatoes and fry them as a warm meal. The first recipe for English chips was published in 1817 by William Kitchener in the Cook's Oracles. Fried fish comes from Spanish Jewish immigrants, where fish would be covered in a light, thin batter and fried in oil. However, these elements are said to have come together in Lancashire, a county in the northwest of England. The first chip shop was opened in a wooden hut in Oldham in the early 1860s, though the date is not entirely known. It quickly became a cheap staple food in the north, spreading throughout the country and gaining popularity in the later 19th century. It became so popular that it wasn't rationed in World War I or World War II because it was a good filling meal and would keep morale high. Its popularity only grew because in 1999 over 300 million servings of fish and chips were sold in the UK. That's 6 per person. It's only selling more, as around 382 million fish and chips are now sold every year. Nowadays there are 10,500 fish and chip shops, or chippies, in the UK. The culture in the north is a very tough one, shaped by events that leave impressions on the people living there. Arguably, one of the biggest events to happen in recent times in the north was the pit closures, courtesy of Margaret Thatcher and the Tory government. There was a nationwide miners' strike from March 1984 to March 1985. When the mining industry was nationalised in 1947, there were 108 mines in Lancashire, but now there are none. During this time, many people did not have a solid income and were struggling with money. Families needed a cheap, easy and nutritious meal, and fish and chips was the obvious choice. Fish was readily available from the nearby sea, and potatoes were cheap to buy, especially in bulk. For the batter, all you needed was flour and water, and it could be fried in lard, which is essentially leftover animal fat that was easy to get a hold of. After these pit closures, a seaside town called Blackpool started regaining its popularity. With attractions like the seaside, roller coasters and a light tower, many people went there for their holidays. The tourists wanted a nice, fresh seaside meal, and fish and chips was extremely popular, and still is today. There are many adaptations and variations of the classic that is fish and chips. For example, many different fish can be used. The most popular are cod and haddock, however pollock or hake can be used too. There are also vegan options, with some people even replacing the fish for tofu. There are also many different ways to have the batter. Some people use beer instead of water, and corn flour can be used instead of flour. Soda water is a new adaptation being used now. There are several ways to make a light batter or a heavy batter, depending on personal taste. There are also many sauces you can have. The most popular are vinegar, gravy, mushy peas, curry sauce, brown sauce, mayonnaise, ketchup, or just salt. Fish and chips is a very malleable meal that anyone can enjoy and tailor to their preferences. You'll need around 175 ml sunflower oil, 2 white fish, chips, peas, beer, 75 grams self-raising flour and corn flour. First, prepare the chips. To make the batter, combine the flour and corn flour with the beer and mix with a fork. Pour some self-rising flour into a shallow tray. So what I've done is I've made a battering station. So first you dip it in the flour, then you dip it in the batter, let it drip off for a bit, and I'll put one on the plate waiting while I cook the other one. What you want to do is have a plate lined with kitchen towels, so when it comes out of the oil it can dry off a bit there. Add to the oil once it's hot and cook on both sides for about 3 minutes until the batter is crispy. Add the peas and serve. The definition of an English dumpling is a small bowl of suet dough that has been poached in water, milk, stock, soup, or stew. This very traditional and easy recipe dates to before the Roman invasion of Britain, with a very simple recipe of just flour and water. The Romans brought over their own version of dumplings made out of lentils, but they did not become very popular. However, they did show people that there were different ways that a dumpling could be made. Eventually, people started adding milk and herbs and such, and the dumplings started to become larger and larger. Richer people used to enjoy their dumplings with things like butter, bone marrow, sugar, and fruits. King John, famous for signing the Magna Carta, was known for his love of dumplings. He ate one every Sunday and believed that everyone should regularly eat dumplings. The dumpling eaters were supposedly a group of Romans who refused to return home after eating the delicious dumplings in England. Dumplings are traditionally made with suet and often paired with stews or broths. Common meats with dumplings include beef, chicken, pork, and duck. Mince and dumplings, however, originated in the Northeast and is now exclusively associated with the area. The Northeast was historically an area of mostly working class, and this stereotype still lives today. Often seen as poor or jobless, the Northeast was hit especially hard in the 80s, when Thatcher closed down the majority of coal mines and shipyards, putting thousands out of jobs and causing economic turmoil in the region. However, this truly strengthened the Northeast and brought together a very tight sense of community. They are warm, friendly, down-to-earth, and very hard-working people, and are very proud to call themselves Geordies. This can be seen reflected in the food, as there is always a certain meal that brings everyone together and can have in common. Mince and dumplings in itself is quite simple. It is essentially just a beef stew with dumplings on top. The mince could be turkey, chicken, or pork mince, or even vegan mince. The suet could also be substituted by adding a bit of stock into the dough mixture, or just using vegetable suet if it needs to be vegetarian. The dumplings themselves are very malleable, and you can do almost anything with them. This recipe requires dry stock, thyme, rosemary, garlic powder, self-raising flour, sugar, and an onion, 500 grams mince, beef stock, suet, tinned tomatoes, and vegetables of choice. Firstly, add the mince to the pan. Then, chop the onion and your vegetables into fine pieces and add to the mince. After that, add the tinned tomatoes and the dry stock and mix well. Then make the stock with the cube and boiling water and add to the mince. Add some sugar and a bay leaf. To make the dumplings, add the flour and suet in a bowl, along with rosemary, thyme, salt, and garlic powder. Mix with your hands, then add a teaspoon of cold water at a time, mixing with your hands after every spoonful until the dough is slightly sticky. This should be about 8 spoonfuls. Roll the dough into small balls, then add to the stew for about 20 minutes. Then serve and enjoy.